How's it going, you beautiful people? I'm Jake the Ashen Hollow. I want to start this video with giving a big shout out to my buddy Wacky for collabing with me on this video. He came up with the theory and he wrote the script, which is the hard part, and he let me take on the easy parts. So big shout out to him. I'll have his links to his stuff in the description below, so definitely go give him some love. But let's jump right into it. Today I'm going to tell you the tale of an orphan girl and her duty. The story of this young painter who intends to create a new world using dual powers of fire and blood is also the story of her home, Ariandel. Trapped in a library perched on a hill overlooking the Corvian settlement, she's a victim of circumstance. But that won't stop her from completing her task, for she understands the gravity of the adage passed down by her mother.
Those who aren't kin to fire cannot paint a world. Those absorbed by fire must not paint a world.
It is by studying the events of her life that we may come to understand the nature of the painted world, what occurred therein before the arrival of the player, and its ultimate fate. As with many biographies, it's best that we start at the beginning. But the beginning of our story is not the birth of our plucky young heroine, but the solemn duty of her mother. I'm going to come right out and say it. The painter's mother is crossbreed Priscilla. This is mostly, I admit, based on appearances. Even a cursory glance at the painter makes it plain that the dragon blood courses through her veins just as it did in Priscilla. The pale green skin, the slit eyes, they're the same. Those of you who played the first Dark Souls will likely remember that we found Priscilla in the painted world of Ariamis, the cold, dark world that was home to those things with no home of their own. However, by the events of Dark Souls 3, Ariamis is no more. All we can find is the painted world of Ariandel, and Priscilla is nowhere to be seen. But when we look closely at the landscape of both worlds, it quickly becomes obvious that there are eerie similarities between the two. When we first arrive in Ariandel, we find ourselves in a wooded area filled with strange knights and ferocious wolves. This area looks vaguely familiar to the scenery we see, but can't access behind the rope bridge we stand on when we first arrive in Ariamis. And the rope bridge is another similarity. In Ariamis, it's our starting point. In Ariandel, we see a vaguely similar construction after traveling deeper into the world. In Ariandel, the rope bridge leads to the chapel where we find an NPC named Sister Frieda. In Ariamis, the chapel also exists, but it's in a much more dilapidated state. In Ariamis, we find Priscilla on a gladiatorial coliseum. In Ariandel, we find Pyromancer Dunnel on almost an identical arena. In Ariamis, there's an underground sewer containing a crank that once turned activates a statue that turns to reveal the entrance to the boss area, while in Ariandel, you find a similar crank activating a statue in an underground room. We can't say for sure whether Ariandel is the same world as Ariamis but somehow repurposed, or if it's a completely different world built in the image of Ariamis. Either way, the connections between the two are obvious. So what happened to Ariamis? Well, when we first arrive in Ariandel, the world is turning to rot, which is a euphemism for its death. The NPC villager in the Forlorn Settlement tells us,
"When the world rots, we set it afire for the sake of the next world. It's the one thing we do right, unlike those fools on the outside."
It's clear that the painted worlds, much like the outside, have their own cycles of life, death, and rebirth. In the case of the painted worlds, the onset of death is indicated by what's known as rot, a fungus-like infection that appears in dark corners and slowly spreads, leaving the inhabitants with no choice but to burn their home and to create a new one. At some point after the events of the first Dark Souls, Ariamis began to rot, and so Priscilla, as the guardian of the land, initiated the burning of Ariamis and the creation of its successor, Ariandel. And I believe the artist behind the creation of this new painting was none other than Father Ariandel, servant of the gods. Why did the gods send Ariandel to create a new world? We can't be sure, but I'd guess they felt a measure of responsibility for the pathetic inhabitants, along with a prudent desire to keep certain things and certain people secret. So we know how Priscilla ended up in Ariandel, and Ariandel was almost certainly the birthplace of her daughter. and we can only surmise that as the years passed, the rot that once afflicted Ariamis has now appeared in Ariandel, and Priscilla, foreseeing the eventual death of their home, once again beseeched the gods for salvation. It's clear from our conversations with the painter that both ash and flame are needed to begin the process.
I believe. I feel the scent of ash upon thee. Thou art the one of whom Uncle Gale spoke. The one to show me flame.
But this time, something went wrong.
Wait, you've the same scent as that woman. Then you must be an action one. You must be.
Gale knows the painter, and was almost certainly a witness to the events that occurred in the painting prior to our arrival. He's delighted to find us because another Ash, Elfrida, of the Sable Church, arrived in the painted world before we did. Elfrida was once head of the church. Her mission, together with her sisters, was to bring salvation to Hollowkind by finding their true Lord of Dark. It was a mission that led her to follow the path of countless other undead and chase the flame, not to link it as the previous lords had, but to wrest it from its mantle and usher in an age of true dark. But she failed to reach the flame and turned to ash. And of course, like all other ash, she rose for the toll of the bell as the lords of Cinder abandoned their thrones. But this time, she didn't follow her assigned path. She abandoned the flame. But she didn't return to Londor either. She abandoned the dark too. Eventually, she would even abandon her own name.
Was the soul of my sister, Elfrida. A poor wench turned to ash, who would abandon Londor.
So the world was turning to rot. They had Ash and Elfrida. All they needed was a flame. But who was the flame? Well, we're asking the wrong question. The question we should be asking is, who was the father? I mentioned earlier that one of the NPCs we meet in Ariandel is the invader, Livid Pyromancer Dunnel. Dunnel uses the Pyromancer's parting flame, the description of which reads, "The pyromancy flame of Livid Pyromancer Dunnel that attracts the echoes of death. When Dunnel lost his hideous spouse, he gave his own pyromancy flame as an offering, which transformed into a parting flame." To you and I, it might seem rather harsh to call a dead man's wife hideous, as if rubbing salt in a wound, but there's a good reason for it. Remember the peculiar doll in Dark Souls 1 that gave us access to the painted world? Here's its description. A strange doll in strange dress. There was once an abomination who had no place in the world. She clutched this doll tightly and eventually was drawn into a cold and lonely painted world. I believe his hideous spouse was Priscilla, and of course that also means that he's the painter's father. It's also worth noting that we fight Dunnel in the same spot we do Priscilla on the ancient Colosseum. Speaking of Priscilla, simple observation tells us that the painter is a lot shorter than Priscilla, which suggests that she has the DNA from a creature a lot smaller than her crossbreed mother. It would very much make sense for her father to be human. What happens next is speculative, but the pieces fit together nicely. Priscilla intended to burn the world, but needed Elfrida to act as ash to kindle the flame, and the father to paint the next world. But Elfrida chose a very different fate. Her soul reads, "Frida was the first ash to enter the painting, but together with the good father they chose rot over fire." Priscilla was betrayed by Father Ariandel. Why? I guess we'll never know. Perhaps old Ariandel was too proud of the world he'd created to let it burn to cinders. And as for Elfrida's motivations, well, when we find her in Ariandel Chapel, she's playing the role of guardian to the forlorn. Her ordained set says, after renouncing everything, Frida discovered a people that she wished to protect, and assumed the precise form that they yearned for. Elfrida likely admired Priscilla, and coveted the love and respect she had for the forlorn, and so, having abandoned her own church, her own people, desired to replace them with the inhabitants of the painted world. How Priscilla died will likely forever remain a mystery, but I do believe that it's her mummified corpse we see at the end of the boss arena. And what about Dunnel? Well, let's go back to the parting flame. When Dunnell lost his hideous spouse, he gave his own pyromancy flame as an offering, which transformed into a parting flame. After Priscilla's death, in a desperate attempt to finish the ritual, he tried to burn the world himself by offering his own flame to the Lord vessel we find in the boss arena. But of course he failed and lost his mind, forever cursed to wander the worlds as a mad spirit. While the now orphaned child was led away to the library so she could never threaten the new order, only Gale escaped the carnage to tell the world of what took place. So Father Ariandel and Elfrida were victorious. They weren't quite home free yet. The painter could be dangerous, so Sir Wilhelm stood guard at her door. The forlorn needed an icon to worship, so Elfrida took the name Sister Frieda and assumed the precise form they yearned for. And Father Ariandel, knowing full well that Dunnell's flame would never be quenched, agreed to take an eternal vigil over the tiny fire to ensure that it would never rise again to threaten their home.
I see flame flickering once again. Not enough blood yet shed. My flail, bring me my flail. Ah, Frieda, what stops thine ears? Please, my flail, right away.
Of course, we managed to defeat the dastardly coup leaders, yet the painter's duty remains. We have shown her flame, but she needs the blood of the Dark Soul to create her new world. And if we follow our courageous friend Gale to the city of Pygmy Lords, we do indeed acquire the bloody pigment, though it requires great sacrifice. We all carry the weight of expectations on our shoulders. How we manage this burden defines who we are, and the future is the inescapable result of the choices we make. The painter chose to bear the weight, for the sake of the forlorn, for the sake of the next world. And in the end, all that remains is her art, a vision of duty laid bare on canvas and paint. The future is hers to mold. And that about wraps everything up. I want to thank each and every one of you so much for watching. Really means a lot. And like I said at the beginning, please go check out Wacky. This was mostly all of his work, and he did a great job. It was really fun to work with him. So go give him some love. And of course, you'll find all of my social medias and all that good jazz down in the description below as well. Again, thank you all for watching. Take care, and until next time.